Well, good morning, everybody. And my name is Mike Caldwell. I'm the manager of estate gift planning with United Way of Central Indiana. And welcome to our webinar this morning that we're going to be talking about smart giving, why, when, and how. And, today's webinar is brought to you by the Always United group of United Way and the IU Senior Academy. And we want to thank them for their participation. And the Always United group was put together 3 or 4 years ago with the idea of helping people transition into retirement. And in that function, we provided a lot of different webinars over the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm going to have, Catherine post that in our chat. If you'd like to go to the Always United piece of our website, you can see what we're all about, and also the recordings that we have of different webinars we've had over the years. So let's just jump into today's topic. Like I said, smart giving, why, when, and how. And this webinar is going to be broken into 2 different sections. One is going to be led by Gene Temple, and then I will follow up after Gene is finished with on the how part. Gene will talk about the why and when. But many of you on the call may be familiar with Gene. He's the professor of philanthropic studies and founding dean emeritus at the IU Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and president emeritus of the IU Foundation. So Gene will talk for probably 20, 25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions for him specifically. And when he's finished, then I will bring it to a close with some tax efficiency ways of donating that maybe you're not aware of. So with that, Gene, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. And thanks to all of you who've joined this seminar this morning. This may be a little bit of an introduction to philanthropy and why and how you might, when you might volunteer and give. But we thought that it might be interesting for you to hear a little bit about a little bit of a background on philanthropy. So I'm going to talk first, Mike, if we can move to the next slide. I'm going to first talk about the roles of philanthropy in society. So we don't often think about what philanthropy accomplishes for us, but it really is about reducing human suffering. So think about all of us giving to homeless shelters and those kinds of things over Thanksgiving, trying to make people whole. And then it's about enhancing human potential, helping everybody become what they can become as human beings. And so think about scholarships for colleges, think about volunteering through the United Way to help provide reading assistance to students in schools, etc. It's also about promoting equity and justice, making sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate in society the way we do. And sometimes we advocate for change. We look for new policies that might help those who can't help themselves. But philanthropy is also about building community. It's where we come together, do things together. We have a community here this morning, but there are other kinds of communities that one can build by volunteering, by coming together and being recognized for your gifts through a nonprofit organization, etc. It's where people believe together. It's about providing human fulfillment. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, but it's helping all of us become the best sides of ourselves. And there's really something to this. It's about supporting experimentation and change in society. We can get things done perhaps through experimentation that business or government wouldn't take on. And then finally, it's about fostering pluralism. In the most significant sense of this, we would say it's about making sure the minority is protected from the tyranny of the majority. But it means that we can try to get something done in society in ways we'd like to see it done outside of the government and outside of business. It's a way in which we can, in fact, make society do things in society that please us. And all of these things help us to begin to identify our own values, our own passion about doing the things that we'd like to see done. Now, as the next slide shows, that there is some joy in giving and volunteering. We used to say this as without data, that it made people feel good. But we know from work that's done now by Sarah Conrath and others like her on the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy that giving is good for the donor, that giving and volunteering bring benefits back to the person who gives and the person who volunteers. They're both associated with positive health outcomes. But, people live longer. People have lower blood pressures when they're volunteering. They have lower viral loads. It's especially true for older adults. And that's what makes it so important for us to think about this as a retired community. I'm one of the retired community, by the way. And, so we can, if we give and volunteer, if we think about others instead of just ourselves, we will in fact have positive health outcomes. And this is where this goes back to the whole purpose of philanthropy as human fulfillment. It allows us to be something larger than we can be by ourselves. There's a significantly lower risk of mortality in older adults and the chronically ill. So getting out and volunteering is important. Sign up for it. Sign up to volunteer through the United Way or through an organization that you're associated with, or make a contribution through the United Way, through an organization that you're associated with, and you'll find positive effects. The effects are especially strong when the donor identifies with the recipient, like it's somebody you know, or you get to meet the scholarship recipient, or you volunteer and get to see who's helped through the organization and become a donor. So all of these things add up to what we call, or what Sarah Conrath calls, the joy of giving and volunteering. Now, gratitude is also an important thing to think about. So gratitude, we say gratitude facilitates pro-social behaviors. That is, it establishes a relationship between the person who expresses gratitude and the person who receives gratitude. And then it can continue to go back and forth. And it does have a two-way benefit. Those people who express gratitude benefit as much as the person who receives the gratitude. So think about gratitude as a way of giving back for something we received, or think about gratitude as you make a gift and somebody writes you a letter and thanks you for how important that gift was, or you volunteer and the student you volunteered to help, or the homeless person you volunteered to help, expresses thanks. We benefit from that thanks, and so do they when they're doing that. It's another way. When people say thanks to us, we're more likely to volunteer again and to give more. But it also has an impact on the beneficiaries. That is, beneficiaries, when they can say thanks to you in person, it helps them. Gratitude, expression of gratitude, brings human fulfillment, and that's whether you're a volunteer and a donor, or whether you're a person who's receiving volunteer or donor services. Now, you received electronically. I always say in the mail, but the mail goes electronically these days. You received the philanthropic autobiography and the ethical will. Both of these documents are important for us to quote unquote discover our passion about how we'd like to be engaged in a way that's meaningful to us. If we become engaged and there's no meaning in that for us, then it doesn't mean anything. And typically, these come back to our own values. Sometimes they're values that we learned as children, that we came to believe in as children. Sometimes we got them through religion. Sometimes we got them through through a civics class. Along the way, as we grew up and developed and became retirees, we developed a life set of values, and it's following those values that gets us to volunteering and giving out of our passion in ways that are meaningful to us. So the philanthropic autobiography is a way in which we tell a story or write a story of our own lifetime association with philanthropy, asking such questions as what are your earliest memories of giving and volunteering? Now, many of us remember tithing or putting money into a collection basket, or giving money on the street to somebody who was asking for money, or maybe putting change into the Salvation Army kettle. Those might be some of our earliest memories, but my earliest memory, it really comes back to when our house burned and the volunteer fire department showed up. And by the way, the volunteer fire department is alive and well across Indiana. We did a study of this using ag economists at Purdue to conduct the study, but volunteer fire departments are how communities respond and respond to disasters and protect property in small rural communities. So what are your earliest memories of giving and volunteering? Well, it's not only did the volunteer fire department show up, we did lose the house, but we didn't lose the buildings that were near the house. And then people from the community volunteered to provide us with food, clothing, shelter during that time. And even without a formal nonprofit organization, that kind of volunteering and contributing took place. And it was my earliest memory of the fact that society works in a way that where those who need help finally somehow get it. And it comes to them. It comes to them either through informal or formal means. Well, who were some of your earliest role models? And then what does philanthropy mean to you today? What does volunteering and giving mean to you today? How are you engaged? And how could you be engaged from some of your deepest values? What motivates, if you're volunteering now, what motivates you to volunteer, to share your expertise? And by the way, those of us who are in retiring age now, we like to share our expertise. There are studies about this, that we want to share some of our expertise. In other words, we don't want to volunteer and just stuff envelopes. So organizations need to take that in place. So reflect on the questions on the worksheet that we sent you, make notes, and begin writing your own philanthropic autobiography. You can do this over time as memories return, as some of your role models become more clear to you, and as new experiences are available to you. You can begin adding those to your philanthropic autobiography. It doesn't have to be formal. You're not going to publish this, but it's a nice document to keep handy. And by the way, if we think back far enough and clearly enough about all of this, all of us, each of us, has somehow been helped in philanthropy. And so we need to take stock of that. We need to take stock of how we have been helped, because that will also give us some clue about how we want to move forward. And the next thing then that we want to talk about is the ethical will. Now, most of us, and if you haven't yet done a will, please make a commitment that you'll leave this seminar and do a will of your fiscal assets. And maybe Mike's going to help you with that. But our ethical will focuses on our values and what we want to see fostered in the next generation and beyond, instead of focusing on our fiscal assets. So we start asking questions about, what the beliefs and actions that are the beliefs that have come to have an impact on our actions, on our careers, perhaps, on the way we've participated in society, perhaps on our own lives. And that belief system is what activates us to take action, to do things, perhaps to be engaged, etc. It's a very valuable question to ask ourselves. What of our values do we think will be useful to the next generation and to generations beyond that? I like a Native American concept that you never do anything today without thinking of the seventh generation out. So the seventh generation concept causes you to think in long terms. And there are, in fact, values that we have that we hope will be there for the seventh generation. We hope that some of our some of what we leave behind will be valuable to the seventh generation out. That the world we leave behind, in fact, will be valuable to the seventh generation out. So the ethical will can be the foundation for meaningful volunteering and giving, including planned giving, that Mike's going to talk some about. What do we want to leave behind? What do we think we'd like to see happen in society in the future? And we think we can do better with our money, with our time, than the government or business can. And so that becomes then a meaningful way that we can drive ourselves forward in giving. So again, here, reflect on the questions on the worksheet, outside of this seminar, and commit yourself to act on ways in which you can pass your values on to your assets. So I'll just stop there, Mike, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, well, let me check the chat room and see if there's any questions. Gene, it doesn't appear that there are any. So unless somebody has a question, feel free to come off mute and ask Gene while we have it.
Yeah, you bet you need to ask a question, or I'll have to give a 5-minute or a 10-minute lecture. Which all you have to do is ask me a question. I give a 10-minute lecture. I hope this has been valuable to you as we talked about what you do next in terms of volunteering and giving. And Mike's going to talk about how you might give and what some of the advantages are to the different ways of giving. We thought it might be useful to have kind of a quote unquote soft side introduction to what philanthropy is and what it means to us. And I think, and we've studied this now, we know more about it than we did in the past. One of my sons is at Greenbrier today, and Greenbrier is where the Filer Commission held its conference to actually define the sector that we're talking about, because before the Greenbrier conference, the Filer Commission, nonprofit activity, giving and donating, those things were just out there. It happened informally. We never measured it. We never tried to get a hold of how much it meant to us, in the various ways in which you can give. But think about all the things that happen around you that are because somebody gives their expertise, and somebody volunteers.
So we do have a couple of questions.
Okay, Gene, it looks like we do have a couple of questions. So
first question, how do we involve other seniors in volunteering?
Well, it's a very good question, Christy. I do like, I just finished teaching a three-week seminar last week in Evansville, and on major gifts. And I like to start every seminar I do that's related to philanthropy by talking about the joy of giving. So I think that's one way that we can, in fact, bring people into volunteering, is to share with them some of what we know. And that slide is a summary of some of Sarah Conrad's work, but there's much more that looks at. For example, we know that when people think of others, when they volunteer, when they make contributions, there's actually electrical activity in the pleasure area of the brain. So people do enjoy giving, but I think that they only enjoy it when they do it from their value system, from their belief system, when they're giving according to their passions. But I would first of all share that slide on giving and on the fact that there's joy in giving, that there are in fact measurable outcomes on those who give and volunteer, especially older people. And I know one study that I used early on, a comparative study of widows and widowers, and those who got out in the community and volunteered and helped others instead of sitting at home and moping, they way outlived that other study group. So, I mean, I think there's something in here for our life, so that the more we do to help others, the more we do in terms of volunteering, probably the better it is for us. So it comes back to be a benefit. That's one
If I
way
could
of,
just add one thing to that, Gene, if anybody wants to contact either Catherine or myself here at United Way, we do have volunteer opportunities that come
Yeah.
up with some of the agencies that we work with. And we'd be happy to share those with anyone that would have an interest.
and Mike, I think you also have an infrastructure built for those of us who may have an interest in working with children in the schools, right?
Right, right. Yeah,
And
through
so
our READ-UP program, very active in the READ-UP program, and actually we need volunteers to step up and to get into the schools to help these kids, the children read at the third grade level. So
Yeah,
a big
so-
demand for that.
So that's something that my wife and I have been thinking about doing, but United Way has a structure, so we don't have to go around and find a school and then try to get it worked out. United Way has a structure, so they can place you right into a school.
Right. And the second question?
When giving to a favorite charity, how important is it to consider that organization's percentage of administrative costs?
Well, George, this is a really good question. We did a big study of this. There's a website called coststudy.org. We spent nearly $1 million of foundation money from the East Coast to do this. But it turns out that, the percent of administrative cost is, depends on the type of organization it is, whether it's a homeless shelter or a university, how old the organization is, how big the staff is, those kinds of things. But here's what I want to let you know. It costs money to run a good, solid organization. You want effective planning, management, evaluation. You want fundraising to be, you might want a good fundraising program. All of that costs money. And we have been saying that administrative cost is not the best thing to use to judge an organization, because some organizations are very sophisticated. They do cost accounting, and they can lay off some administrative costs to program, et cetera. But there's a new study out now that uses data that Patrick Rooney and I developed at the School of Philanthropy that talks about the fact that organizations with slightly higher administrative costs are in fact more effective in delivering their services than those that really try to skimp. So I don't think you want to see an organization that spends all of its money on administration, but you also don't want an organization that's starved in administration so that it can't do effective planning, it can't do effective evaluation, because everyone wants to know today what's the impact of the organization that I'm supporting. And to study impact, it costs a bit of money. Can't just talk about the number of people who walk in the front door. You want to know something about what happens to those people when they leave the back door. And so I would say be patient, George. Ask questions. Look at organizations 990s. Ask for their evaluation reports, their annual reports. Make sure that organizations hold themselves accountable, but don't just ding them because their administrative cost is 3 cents on the dollar higher than you think it should be. Now, is that a satisfactory answer, George? You can ding me if you want to, or ask a follow-up.
Yes, thank you. That's helpful.
Becky, the study that I'm talking about is Cost Study, COSTSTUDY.org.
Okay, any other questions?
Well,
Catherine,
somebody did a follow-up. Organizations need dollars to attract and retain talent too. And I think that's true. I mean, there is a talent issue with nonprofit organizations because they typically don't pay same level of salaries, but they need money if they're going to attract and retain talent. I mean, it's a real big issue. Not everybody volunteers.
Okay, Gene, I think that's all the questions that are in the chat room. So thank you very much for your time and your words of wisdom, and I'm sure that everybody in the that's attending today was able to pick up on something very valuable in what you said. So appreciate your time.
You're very welcome, Mike, and I want to thank all of you who signed on to this seminar. I think it's a very valuable seminar, and thank you for listening to this part of it, because sometimes people want to go straight to the stuff and not know anything about the background. So I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope that joy of giving really sinks in with people and becomes a way in which people can be motivated to volunteer.
Okay, well, thank you, Gene. And I did want to mention, I should have mentioned this when we started, but the webinar will be recorded. So everybody will receive a copy of the recording and also the slides after we're finished. And so I know sometimes it's important, because otherwise you're too busy trying to take notes and, as opposed to being able to concentrate on what is being said. So we will make sure that is sent out to everybody. But Gene, thanks again, and safe travels.
Thank you.
Okay, well, again, my name is Mike Caldwell, and I'm going to be talking about the giving wisely. And we're going to be talking specifically about 2 tax efficient ways to support your favorite nonprofit, whether that's United Way or any other nonprofit that you have an interest in and support. But, we're going to talk a little bit about taxes. And I realize that taxes are not the most exciting thing that people want to listen to. So we'll try to keep it at a very high level. But, unfortunately, taxes touch nearly every aspect of planning, of our financial goals, anywhere from savings to investing to retirement, why it pays to know the impact that taxes have on all of the decisions that we make as we try to put this plan together. But with some basic tax knowledge and the use of a few simple strategies, it's easier to create a plan than that can save us significant amount of money, as opposed to handing it over to our Uncle Sam. So, what I'm going to try to do today in the few minutes that we have left is to discuss 2 different ways to create a gift in a very tax efficient way by unlocking highly appreciated assets and also giving from your traditional IRA through the IRA charitable rollover. So, I think we can all look back over our careers or years that we've been donating and think of different ways that we have donated. And most of those have probably been through a workplace campaign. Could have been cash, could have been by check, could have been by credit card, a lot of different ways that we have given over the years. But unfortunately, with the Secure Act raising the standard deduction a few years ago, strictly from a tax standpoint, it's really kind of difficult to be able to write off those donations because the standard deduction is so high. So, and not that taxes are all the most important piece of giving, because it isn't. And I don't mean to come across that way, but I would like to go through just a couple different ways where you can make gifts, where, taxes do make a significant difference in the amount that you're able to give. So we're going to start off with gifts of appreciated securities first. And exactly what is that? In terms of what we're going to be talking about today, it's really appreciated assets that are in your taxable accounts. Okay, so it's not going to apply, at least the first part of this session is not going to apply to your traditional or Roth IRA, 401k, 403b, or any other types of retirement plans, but strictly taxable assets that you hold in your taxable accounts. And again, for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to be talking specifically about publicly traded stocks, mutual funds, and ETFs. And just so we're all kind of on the same page, and I know everybody probably already knows this, but publicly traded stocks is a type of investment that represents an ownership share in a company. So it could be a stock such as Apple or Amazon or Lilly or Merck or Johnson & Johnson, but these are all stocks that, at your fingertips with your iPhone or your laptop, you can probably punch in the symbol and find out exactly what the value is of that stock at any given point in time. The other vehicle are mutual funds, which is, I'm sure many of you on the call today hold mutual funds or have in the past, but it's strictly an investment in a group of stocks as opposed to a single stock. And these mutual funds could be actively managed, they may be passively managed. The only thing that makes the mutual funds a little bit different is that we really don't know the exact value of that mutual fund until after the market closes. And so I think the market closes here, roughly at 4 o'clock, and they post the mutual fund prices or values usually around 5 or 5:30, something like that. Exchange traded funds, ETFs, very similar to a mutual fund in the fact that they are a basket of stocks, but they do take on more of the, they're treated more like a publicly traded stock in the fact that with an ETF, you can buy or sell those while the market is open. So you can actually buy an ETF, sell an ETF, find it, while the market's open, and find out exactly what the price is at that time. So some may argue that an ETF might be a little bit more tax friendly than a mutual fund, but I'm not an investment advisor, so I can't really say that for sure. Okay, so the benefits of donating appreciated securities, and again, this is a benefit of donating appreciated securities out of your taxable accounts, is twofold. One, and this is the big one, avoids capital gains taxes. And I'm going to dive into that in my next couple slides as to, exactly what are capital gains taxes and how they may affect you and how much impact they do have on your gift. And the other one is increases your federal tax deduction if you itemize. Now, again, with them raising the standard deduction a few years ago, I think for married couples, it's like almost $26,000. Very few people itemize anymore. In fact, the other day I saw something, it's like 10% of the people itemize and the other 90% don't. But if you are in that 10% that do itemize, then donating appreciating securities again can be a huge benefit. So let's just to make sure we have kind of an understanding of the capital gains tax and the value that it brings to donations. Is the capital gain is the increase in a stock's value compared to what you paid for it. So if you hold individual securities or an ETF or a mutual fund, back when you purchased that would be what we call your cost basis. And if you bought a stock at $10 a share and it's now at 20, the cost basis for that stock is going to be $10. And then the difference between that and what you sell it for is going to be the appreciation in that particular sale. So from a federal capital gains tax standpoint, you're going to be taxed. Again, this is in your taxable accounts. Taxes on long-term capital gains, also known as capital gains that are more than a year. So if you've held that security or mutual fund or ETF for more than a year, then the long-term capital tax rate is going to vary anywhere from 0% all the way up to 15 or 20%, depending upon your income. And in my next slide, I'll show you exactly how that breaks down. And most of you on the call probably know what your income is, so it'll be pretty easy for you to figure out what your long-term capital gains tax rate is. On the state income tax, I'm really not going to spend too much time on that, if any at all, because every state has their own rules as far as long-term capital gains. So I'm just going to mention it as a factor. It's one more tax that you will be hit with if you or take into consideration if you sell individual securities in your accounts. So let's look at the long-term capital gains rates for 2022. And 2022 is kind of key because I've been told that the long-term capital gains rates are going to, from what I've been told, it will stay the same, but the income brackets will be a little bit larger. So if you see along the top, you see the filing status, and then below that, single, married filing jointly, married filing separately, or head of household. And across the top, you have the 3 different rates: the 0 rate, 15% rate, and the 20% rate. So for example, if somebody's single and their income is $30,000, then guess what? There's no capital gains tax that individual is going to have to pay. However, if you're married and filing jointly and your income is $150,000, then any appreciated asset that you sell, you would have to pay your tax rate would be 15% on that gain. And likewise, if you're married and filing jointly and your income is significantly higher than $500,000, then you would be at the highest rate, or 20%. But again, these are long-term capital gains rates, not federal income tax rates. So if we go to this next slide, again, this is only going to apply if you itemize, but it's another huge benefit of selling appreciated assets if you do itemize, then the deductions lower your taxable income by the amount of the deduction, which is the fair market value of the stock gift. And then the tax savings would be the deduction amount times the tax rate. So from a federal income tax standpoint, I believe there's 7 different tax brackets, all the way up to 37%. So your tax savings would be whatever your tax rate is times the amount of the fair market value of the stock gift. Okay, so as I mentioned before, when you're talking about taxes, it gets a little mushy. So what I want to do is kind of break this down into 2 different examples. And hopefully through these 2 different examples, it'll show you the value of donating appreciated assets as opposed to selling them on your own. So my first example is going to be where Jane sells stock in the market and donates the proceeds. The second example will be where Jane donates the stock to the nonprofit and the nonprofit sells the stock. So let's, in looking at this first example, Jane sells the stock in the market, donates the proceeds. So back in 2016, she bought 25 shares of XYZ stock for $100 each for a grand total of $2,500. 5 years later, so it's longer than the 1 year that's required for the long-term capital gain rate. She sells her 25 shares of XYZ stock for $225 each for a grand total of gross proceeds of $5,625. Now, since Jane sold this stock in her own account, she's going to be on the hook for a capital gain on her 25 shares that she sold, and she just happened to be in the 15% capital gains rate bracket. So we take 15% of that $3,125, which was her profit, and she's on the hook for $469 in federal capital gains tax. And then in addition to that, she would be liable for $156 in state income tax. So total tax due in her situation would be $625. Okay. So if we move to the next example, instead of Jane selling the stock on her own and donating the proceeds, she donates the stock to her favorite nonprofit, or it could be several different nonprofits. It doesn't have to be just one. But in this example, to show you the difference, she bought the same 25 shares of XYZ stock for $100 each back in 2016, total of $2,500. 5 years later, she donates those 25 shares to the nonprofit. Didn't sell them on her own, donated those to the nonprofit. They sold the $225 stock for each for $225 for the gross proceeds of $56.25. So the nonprofit was able to keep the full $5,625, and because Jane is no longer liable for the capital gains tax on her shares of the XYZ stock. So the advantage of donating the shares to the nonprofit is the nonprofit does not pay taxes. So they're able to keep the full amount of the sale and not be liable for any kind of capital gains tax. So in this situation, Jane receives the following tax savings. She avoids the $156 in state income tax and avoids the $469 of federal capital gains tax. And in this situation, I just kind of pointed this out or included that Jane does itemize, and which would allow her a federal income tax deduction of $1,350. So even if she didn't itemize, she would still gain the benefit of avoiding the state income tax and the federal capital gains tax. So the total tax savings in this example would be $1,975. So comparing the two to each other, selling the stock, if Jane sold the stock in the market herself and sent the proceeds in, she'd owe $625 in taxes. But if she donated the stock instead, the savings would be roughly $1,975 if she itemized, or roughly 35% of her total gift. But even if she didn't itemize, it would represent probably around 10 to 15% of her total gift. So a huge difference in, if a person goes into this thinking, okay, I want to sell some stock and donate it to my favorite nonprofit, the whole key is donate the stock rather than selling it yourself and allow the nonprofit to sell the stock and keep the full proceeds. So the tax advantages of donating appreciated securities, I've kind of hit on this, but just as a quick review, the donor avoids all capital gains taxes when the stock is donated directly to a nonprofit. And you can see I have there in bold directly to the nonprofit. Just make sure that if this is your goal, that you instruct your custodian, whoever is holding your stock, whether that's Schwab or Vanguard, Fidelity, Merrill Lynch, whoever it may be, Raymond James, that they send the stock directly to the nonprofit and do not allow them to sell the stock themselves. Because if they do that, then you're on the hook for the long-term capital gain. The donor also receives a federal income tax deduction for the full value of the stock if they itemize. Again, that's probably only going to apply to about 10% of the people. But the donor, and what this results in is that the donor can give more for the same cost or give the same amount for a lower cost. So what's going to be important is if you decide you want to do this, there's transfer, whether it's United Way or any nonprofit, is to go to their website and they will have instructions on there on how to have your custodian send the stock to them. But they're going to want to know the name of the custodian, the address of the custodian, the name and contact of the advisor at that custodian that actually sells the stock. They'll want to know the account number, the DTC number, and the tax ID number. And, if you go just on our website, if you go to uwci.org and hit the donate button, it would take you directly to that information, should you want to look for that on our website. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the first part as far as the benefits of selling and donating appreciated assets. The second one is what we call qualified charitable distributions, or better known as a QCD. And to me, this is my favorite. And because it really carries a lot of different benefits by giving out of your traditional IRA. Now, this is not going to apply on your Roth, but if you hold a traditional IRA, I think we can all look back, several years ago when we opened up a traditional IRA, and I think they came into being back in the 70s, which would be 40, 50 years ago. But at the time, if you opened up a traditional IRA, chances are you were able to write off that on your taxes. Okay. And then, every year, if you contribute more, you could also claim a deduction for that. In the meantime, all these donations have grown tax deferred every year. Okay, so you've enjoyed two tax benefits. One, that you deduct it off your taxes, and all these years that you've had it invested, even if you've gone into your traditional IRA and bought and sold different stocks or mutual funds, you never had to pay any capital gains tax on that because it's inside your traditional IRA. But that's the good news. The bad news is that once you reach the age of 72, you have to start taking what we call RMDs, or required minimum distributions. And Uncle Sam is actually right there at at the door, waiting to get the taxes that have built up in your traditional IRA. And a traditional IRA really is full of taxes that are going to have to be paid to somebody, to Uncle Sam. And they even go so far, and some of you on the call may be in this situation. I ran into this a couple of years ago. But once you hit that, they tell you the minimum that you have to take out of your traditional IRA every year. And, a couple of years ago, I know it was the very first year was 3.65. So let's just say, for example, if you have a traditional IRA and the value is $1 million, I'm using that just so we can make the numbers work. But if you take 3.65% of that, that's $36,500 that you have to take out of your IRA. Okay. If you take it out of your IRA, then you have to report that as income on your tax return, and it's going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So depending upon whatever your tax bracket is, whether it's 22%, 24%, 37%, that 36.5 is going to be taxed at whatever your individual tax rate is. So the unfortunate part about that is that so many people that we run into don't need their RMD. They really don't need that to live on, but yet they're forced to take it and apply it to their ordinary income on their tax return. So it can a couple things can happen with that additional income. If you're already drawing Social Security, or maybe a pension, or maybe you're still working, you throw an extra $36,500 in my example on top of your income, it could very easily push you into a higher tax bracket. It could also make you subject to higher Medicare premiums if you've reached that level. But I won't go into any more detail on that. But the situation is you have to take it out as ordinary income and add it all the rest of the income that you have. Now, the good news is that there's a way to get around that. And it's called a qualified charitable distribution, or a QCD. And I know we're dealing with some acronyms here, but the RMD is a required minimum distribution, which you have to take out every year. The QCD is that the Uncle Sam will allow you to take part of that or all of that RMD and donate it directly to a charity. Okay, so back to my example, is if you had to take $36,500 out as income and you decided you didn't want to take 36.5, you only wanted to take 30 and send $6,500 to your favorite nonprofits, you could do that and then only pay income tax on the 30,000 as opposed to the 36.5. And but the key here is that distribution has to come directly from your custodian directly to the nonprofit. If they send it to you and you report it as income, you still, and then donate it later, you're still on the hook for having to pay ordinary income tax on that. So you can see in my example here, you can actually go up to $100,000 a year that you can transfer from your IRA to a qualified nonprofit. But you know, something to keep in mind is that I would, you know, I'm not an advisor, so I can't really give you advice, but you know, I would talk to your advisor or your CPA to see if this makes sense, but to make sure that they are also under the understanding that the donation has to come from them directly to the nonprofit. Okay. And, you know, there are some custodians that actually give you check writing privileges on your IRA. And, you know, again, whether it's, you know, the custodians that I mentioned before, but it makes it even easier if they do provide you with check writing privileges where you can just have the checkbook yourself and then write the check, you know, to the qualified nonprofit. But the other key to this is that, well, two more keys actually, but one is that you make sure you get a receipt, you know, from the nonprofit that specifies that this was a QCD or a money taken out of the traditional IRA sent directly to them, because you're going to have to match that up at the end of the year when you file your taxes so that you're not paying taxes on any more of the RMD than you have to. Okay. So I hope that, you know, another word for the QCD really is, it's oftentimes referred to as the IRA charitable rollover. So it's really kind of one and the same. So by making a QCD donation from your required minimum distribution, you do not have to pay ordinary income taxes on that distribution. And last but not least, you know, the QCD, unlike most donations, is considered an above the line deduction as opposed to an itemized deduction. And I'm going to go to the next slide and show you the difference that makes, because it's huge. So in this example, let's just say the donor elects to make a $5,000 QCD gift to charity. So if you go all the way over to the right-hand side where it says qualified charitable distribution, you know, when I mentioned that it's an above the line deduction, it comes right off of your gross income. So in this situation, if your gross income is $100,000, you take the QCD amount of $5,000, subtract that, which leaves you with a adjusted gross income of $95,000. You still have the standard deduction that you can take if you're not itemizing, which brings down your total taxable income to $69,100. Okay, so the difference is if you look at the middle column where it says normal charitable gift, you know, if you can still make donations, but if it doesn't come out of your IRA as a QCD, your gross income is going to be the same as your adjusted gross income, because a QCD is an above the line deduction. So in that example, you would still be able to, you know, take the standard deduction, which would bring your taxable income down to $74,100. So the benefit there, not only of the QCD, is that you're avoiding having to pay ordinary income tax on the distribution, but you also get to deduct it as an above line deduction. So I hope that kind of clarifies. Again, I know when you're talking about taxes, it gets a little messy, but I think if you will send these slides to you, and hopefully that will help. So really to kind of wrap this up, as far as this portion, you know, you've got a couple different options to consider. One being appreciated assets and or QCDs. But the benefits of the appreciated asset donations is that you can claim a charitable deduction if you itemize, and you can eliminate the capital gains taxes, which might result in larger gifts. On the qualified charitable distributions, the QCDs, you eliminate ordinary income depending upon your tax bracket, and you reduce the value of your IRA and provide an above line deduction. So again, I'm not an advisor, but I will share this information with everybody. I would suggest that if you are interested in either one of these or both of these ways of giving, talk to your advisor about your specific situation, because quite honestly, no two donors are going to be alike. So I'm hoping that going through these two different four ways to give, other than cash or by credit card or check, whatever the case may be, look at your appreciated assets, and typically it's best if you take those with the lowest cost basis, just so that at some point in time, if you did have to sell those assets, it would keep your gain down a little bit. So I will leave it at that. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those for you. So. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any in the chat room. So that's the end of our program today. I want to thank everybody for being online. Hopefully this made sense. And we will be sharing the recording of this and the slides, and we will send those out to you. How long is it? Maybe this afternoon, first thing tomorrow morning. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and hope this was helpful. And thank you for your support.